Okay. We'll call this meeting to order. I will advise the audience that I've just received a call from Councillor Asmundson. Councillor Asmundson is unable to make it to today's meeting. He is advised that I could let everyone know that he's at Eagle Ridge Hospital. He's awaiting a procedure, has been awaiting for a couple of days of procedure, and that he'll be on his feet soon and back at council soon. So he wishes us well. He told me how I should vote on various items today, and I told him whatever. Okay. Mr. Clerk.
I believe Councillor O'Neill tried raising two hands once before, and his body rejected that. The first item on the agenda is the minutes of this committee's meeting held Monday, October 15th, and the recommendations to approve those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor Robinson. All in favour? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Our second item is a delegation. I'd like to invite Councillors Diana Dilworth from Port Moody, Mike Forrest from Port Coquitlam, and Councillor Craig Hodge from Coquitlam, who are here to speak about the Joint Task Force on Mobile Business Licensing update.
I renew my objection to this delegation, but nonetheless.
Which is the red button is forward?
No, that just sends, yeah, that one is forward.
This one's all we want? Okay.
Wait a second, I got
Oh, no,
this
we're not going to
machine
put the
here.
light on.
Okay.
It's okay. We're going to follow a script, so
we'll give you
so
all
we're
5 minutes.
We're not going to go too long on this, but we do have some important information to bring to council. This is a follow-up.
Her name and address for the record. Never mind. Councillor Hodge, please.
Okay. Following a request from the Chamber of Commerce last spring to look at the feasibility of establishing an intermunicipal business licensing system, a task force was established by our three councils, and they appointed Diana Dilworth to represent Port Moody, Mike Forrest to represent Port Coquitlam, and myself to represent Coquitlam. The mandate of the task force was to see if we could make it easier for business to operate in the Tri-Cities by reducing paperwork and fees associated with licensing. So, currently, a business must obtain a license from 3 different cities, and they often expire at different times. We also wanted to see if it was possible to harmonize this process without incurring a lot of city staff time and to ensure that no city would see a drop in their existing revenue. The task force and staff from the 3 cities met with representatives from the Ministry of Jobs, Tourism and Innovation who gathered data from the 3 cities and provided an independent analysis. Staff from the 3 cities from bylaws, economic development, and communications have all been involved in this planning process. After analyzing the data that we supplied to the provincial government, we identified 1,226 mobile trade-type businesses in the Tri-City area. And we found that only 154 of them currently hold a second license in one of our neighboring cities. And of these 154 businesses, they spend a total of $69,000 in licensing fees. The average cost of a license is about $200. So you can see that you can see right there below it the average cost for each city as well. On the data chart, the most interesting statistic is the column on the right, and it shows that businesses currently taking out multiple business licenses, $40,000, come from residents, businesses spending in a neighboring community. And even more interesting is that just over half of that money is collected in Port Moody from businesses located in either Port Coquitlam or Coquitlam. And we believe in part that this is because that Port Moody does a really good job of tracking businesses coming into their community and has a really strong record of achieving compliance with businesses. So this presented our group with a challenge, and that is how to split the non-residential portion, recognizing that a large portion of it comes from one city. So we looked at some different revenue sharing options. The provincial government gave us a number of options, as you can see listed. The easiest one that's being used in some cities where this is, or communities where this is being tried, is to allow each city just to collect what they take in, what they collect, they keep. We also looked at possibly splitting it based on our population, based on the Simon-Fraser formula, and we looked at splitting the fees based on a 1/3 split. However, because 53% of all the non-residential business licensees is collected in Port Moody, none of those formulas work. They don't come close to the 53% that's being currently collected in Port Moody. So in our case, the provincial government has recommended using a formula that recognizes the historical split, and this would give Port Moody its 53% share of the non-resident portion of the licenses. Coquitlam would continue to collect 29%, and Port Coquitlam would collect 18%. However, we also recognize that this compliance increase, that as compliance increases and the pot of revenue grows, that this formula may not work in the future. But it's certainly one that for the pilot project, we want to use. And as I said, we may sort of look at a different form of sharing as the revenue increases. So next, we're going to let Mike Forrest talk a little bit about the second part of this, which is how we're looking at doing the pricing for the license. Does
this work by pushing the center one?
No, this one here.
Try that. Pricing of intermunicipal business licenses. I think the focus here needs to be that we're looking to have bigger compliance. The decision we faced was determining the cost of the mobile add-on license. This is the part of the licensing that will be common to all 3 cities. And the committee asked the province to run several different price structures to ensure that there would not be a drop in revenue to any of the cities. They determined that by eliminating the businesses in the pool that currently take out full business license in multiple cities, the new price of a single intermunicipal license would have to be $250 to make up the loss. We felt this was too high, especially given the average cost of buying a second license is currently about $200, average between all of those, and there would not be an incentive for a business to register with the process. So we asked the province to rework the numbers, assuming there might be an increase in compliance, especially if the price was a bit lower. Increasing sales or compliance by just 10% meant that the break-even point would be as low as $150, but we recommended going with a $165 number, which you see there, to create a small cushion to cover some of the costs. And we go to compliance, which I think is a big focus for us. Of the 1,226 contractor-type businesses, we have identified 1,072 who are not buying a multiple business license. Based on a 10% increase in compliance, we would only need 107 of them therefore 10% of 1,072, to buy a new intermunicipal business license to meet our projections using the $165 fee number. It's important to note that the Okanagan saw a 30% increase in compliance when they proceeded with this process, and participating cities all make more money today than they did before the system was set up. Revenue gain and loss or loss chart. So we've decided on presenting a $165 fee, and using the recommended revenue split, Coquitlam would see an increase in revenue of $1,368, POCO $1,918, Port Moody $2,597. These numbers are small, but they illustrate the cities can easily break even and potentially start to make more money with just a small increase in compliance. As the pot grows, the idea would be to move from a historical spending formula, which we have looked at already and that we're proceeding with, and move to a system that would be easier to manage and that would have each of the cities, keep the revenue they collect, which is what is done in the Okanagan. And now Diana is going to
Yeah, I need the clicker.
have the clicker.
Thank you.
Sorry, there's no time left. Councillor Hodge used up the 5 minutes.
It's really interesting being on this side of the podium. So it is important to note that this research and data was done initially based on businesses just in the mobile construction trade. But each of our cities have very different categories about how we classify our business. During a more in-depth analysis, our staff have collaborated together and have recently determined it would be much easier to open this pilot project up to all local mobile businesses and work instead on a common excluded list. So where initially we were looking just at construction, we're now recommending businesses like landscapers, photographers, caterers, repairmen, cleaning companies, and music teachers will also be included. So we are working on the premise of a one-year pilot project recommended with implementation of January 1st, 2013, and our respective staffs have indicated that is possible. The province is going to continue to assist us and will do a revenue analysis at about 6 months and at the end of the pilot, so we can actually determine whether our projections and our fees are appropriate. And all of the revenue sharing in our model will be reassessed at the end of that 12-month pilot. There's supposed to be one more slide there.
What happened to next steps?
If you hang on 1 sec, I'll get you back to where you need to be.
Okay.
There was just an extra click there.
Yeah. I'll bring it up.
There we go. So we have the next steps. Being here this afternoon is the first presentation to a city. We're going to report out to all 3 cities and meet with the Chamber of Commerce to gain feedback as we go along. There will be a joint staff report that's going to come in November to each of our respective municipalities that will include a draft bylaw and an intermunicipal business license agreement. It is anticipated, it is hoped that each city will pass an IBL bylaw and sign the agreement. Staff will implement the necessary system changes and develop some communication materials. And as a final step, we'll be signing up with the Province Mobile Business Registry, who will help manage the program for us. I think it's important to note that public communication and promotion of this is going to be crucial, and our communication departments will be assisting with that, and the Chamber has indicated that they are there to support us in any way we need.
So just in conclusion, the task force is recommending that our 3 councils proceed with an intermunicipal business license pilot project in time for a January startup. Once in place, this means that businesses located in one of our cities will be able to buy an additional license for $165 that will allow them to operate anywhere in the Tri-City region. This will save local businesses money and reduce red tape because the mobile business license will be tied to their regular license and they will expire together. By implementing an intermunicipal license system in our community, we will be delivering on a long-standing request from our business community. We will also give our citizens a greater choice by providing an increased number of licensed businesses to work in their community. And as a city, we will be able to better track businesses working in our cities. The intermunicipal business license has been established in a number of different regions of our province and has been successful. In the end, we feel that this will be a win for our businesses, a win for our 3 cities, and a win for our residents. And we're open for questions.
Well, this isn't rocket science, but I'm so impressed that we've managed to get here, because this has been talked about forever. We all know that. We've had council members up here that have been raising this issue for years. So I'm just so pleased that the 3 communities are now so close, I hope, to being able to take what I think is really a small step in the right direction to cutting through some of the bureaucracy. So I've got questions from Councillor Sikora, Councillor Reid, Councillor Nicholson.
Number one, you mentioned additional license. So if I buy a business license for Coquitlam for $165, I can buy another license for the other 2 municipalities.
Correct.
Okay. You know, this is very, very good. And I think that that's, you know, if we can make it work, it'll make it work. But I'll tell you, I'm really concerned. It takes a hell of a lot of bookkeeping in each municipality. What happens if one of the municipalities starts falling behind because they feel they're not getting their share of the money? And then when you say that the provincial government is going to help you, God help us if we're going to rely on the provincial government, whoever it is in Victoria, to help us. Because, you know, it's going to be maybe once every 4 years, once every 5 years, you get any kind of report from them. You know, they'd have to hire extra staff, or we have to hire staff. You know, and I can see it right away, you know, that if we're going to put this in, right away we'll have a manager in our department. And that's what I'm concerned, that there be another office set up. Oh, you know what? You can shake your head as much as you want, Mr. Forrest, but you know something? That's what happens. You set up another bureaucratic nightmare in the city. Somebody's got to manage it.
Okay, in other jurisdictions that have done this, the province helped, I guess, and have they had some kind of a staff addition, do you know?
No, and one of the keys is to try to keep this simple. So we're not suggesting that each city rewrite all their bylaws or reorganize their categories. It's going to simply be that when you take out your license, whatever fee the city charges for that particular business, this will be an add-on. So there won't be. It'll be tracked with the existing business license. It will expire with the existing business license. So it strictly becomes part of, almost like a sticker or something on your license. So the whole purpose of this is to try not to lose money at the staff end, because you know, we want to keep this simple for the city as well as for businesses. So we're trying to make this a win for everybody. Compliance issues, if there's a problem with a particular business license, the plan would be is that they would lose the right to carry a mobile business license, and then they would go back to their host city, and if they had to, they would take out 3 separate licenses and fall into that jurisdiction. As I said, there haven't been any major glitches with the other communities that have tried it. They've all seen an increase in compliance, and they've all seen an increase in revenue. And to date, what we're hearing is very good reports that the business community likes it, and it hasn't been an onerous task for staff to administer. But you're right, at some point, the formula sharing will have to be looked at again, and just as the pot continues to grow. And there have been a number of suggestions floated out there. One is that we could move to a different revenue sharing, or one is that if the money starts to grow, that it could be left in a common pot and used for common economic development or something that's a region-wide. So you know, having more money is going to be a nice problem to have. Sure, Mike.
If you could grab the microphone, we do webcast this home, so we want them to have your voice as well as your pretty face.
Oh, sure. Councillor Sikora, good points. The reality is we have been very focused on not costing ourselves more money. Nobody's interested in spending more money in this process. And the other part that I think is important is that we get to have a pretty good look at this partway through the process, and certainly at the end of the year. This is a pilot project. If it doesn't work, you're going to find me, for one, being not in favor of it continuing. And certainly, if it's going to be a bunch more extra costs, if this doesn't make sense from a monetary point of view from the city, I think you'll find all of us not too pleased with it at the end, and there'll be changes.
Well, you know, the thing that concerns me, you know, we've got your city chasing for some of our casino money, you know, because the casino is in Coquitlam, you know, and now the municipalities want to share it. So, you know.
What a good idea.
So now, you know, we've got a little disagreement there, you know, what's happening, see? And I can tell you something, that this thing, you know, even our police force ain't working too good together between Port Coquitlam and Coquitlam, okay? We've got problems there. So, you know, again, you begin to wonder how you're going to put this together that's going to keep 3 cities happy. I don't think so. And you know what? I think it'd be the greatest thing since sliced bread if it would work. But I guarantee you, whether it be next year, the year after, 2 years from now, it's going to be falling apart like...
Something that falls apart.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll go with the best thing since sliced bread part. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Mine is to whomever was sort of in on the basics of this with respect to business insurance. And I'll take, let's say, a gas fitter who fixes fireplaces. He lives in Port Moody and has a business license in Port Moody, but never picked up business licenses in Coquitlam or Port Coquitlam, but he scatters out and he repairs fireplaces all over the place. Because we're becoming a very litigious society, one would wonder if there were a fire in Port Coquitlam or Coquitlam, and everyone says, oh, well, he had a gas fitter in last week, it must be his fault. And he would say, no, I've got a business license in Port Moody. Now the question comes, well, are you a licensed contractor in the city that you're actually doing the business in, doing the repairs in? So my question to you is, was there any discussion about the insurance contracts of the different businesses, if they would allow this to go ahead. I think where you've covered it is where you pass the intermunicipal business license and you sign an agreement, and because there is one that there will be a statement in there that to have a license in one covers it all, might stop any of this litigious stuff that goes through the insurance. Was that looked into it, and was it going to be an additional cost to business?
One of the things that is going to be on when you take out an intermunicipal business license is that you're going to have to comply with the rules and regulations in the municipality that you operate. For example, if you're a roofer and one city says you can start at 8 in the morning, another city says you can't start till 8:30, you're governed by the city's rules of which you're operating in. So we're not standardizing all of our rules and all of our regulations, because that would, as Councillor Sikora mentioned, that would just open up a whole can of worms and a lot of administration. So right in the fine print, it will say that you have to adhere to the rules and regulations of the community that you're operating in.
But
and
that
if you
wasn't
fail
my question.
insurance, I haven't looked at specifically. We'll ask, but I would assume it would fall into the same category, which is you have to carry all the insurance and license permits as you would be required if you were taking out the license in that city.
And I just want to make sure for the businesses that it is covered and that we have looked at it, so that we don't run down the road and run into a big speed bump. Thank you.
We'll look into it. That's why we're here today, so we make sure we get all this ironed out before we bring the licensing application forward.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you. You talked about a one-year pilot and check in at 6 months and at a year. And I could offer you two choices, but I'll just tell you the answer that I want to hear, which is that at the end of a year, you'll continue until the analysis is in and we make a decision to continue or not to continue, right? We won't have a, we're all doing this and now we're not doing it until we get the stats.
It's not sunsetted.
One of the interesting things to look at 6 months is, has our revenue model borne out, and has our forecast on compliance borne out? And we're optimistic that you're going to see an increase in both at 6 months or a year. But at a year, it is our intention fully to come back to each council to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly of the pilot project, and to make a recommendation on moving forward. One of the key to that is the revenue sharing model. At this point, we are looking at a model that ensures that none of the municipalities actually takes a decrease in their licensing revenue. We anticipate that it may take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years to even out or change that model as we move toward a model in which each municipality gets to keep all of the revenue that it takes in without having to share it with the other municipalities. So yes, I do believe beyond the 6 months in a year, we might do 18 months, we might do 24 months, until we get to that place where everybody's bringing in their own revenue. We'll continue to watch this very closely.
And I guess I would suggest that I would hope that you don't have to go back and tweak the revenue model, other than to bring the rest of the Lower Mainland under the tent.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that the cities, Port Coquitlam and Port Moody, work on a calendar year. So their licenses, the bulk of them come up for renewal January 1. In Coquitlam, we work on an annual renewal basis, so if you take the license out March 1st, it expires March 1st. And we don't see that as being a problem, because the license, the mobile portion, will just tag on with the main license. But in order to get a true picture of how the revenue is going to break down, it's important that we have this up and running for January 1st to get a true picture for this year, because otherwise we could miss a big catch, and in which case we might have to go 13 months because we'd have to see. So one of the things that we really want to do is have it up and running so that we can get the bulk of the licenses that come up for renewal January 1st.
Thank you.
Now, it does appear the other half of the room has no interest in this issue. Oh, Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, I think it's back to slide 4. I just needed another explanation of this 53% figure regarding what Port Moody gets revenue from non-licensed resident licenses. So can you just explain that, and then explain that again? I'm a little confused about that. I'm sorry.
Port Moody has exceptional bylaw staff, and we're small enough that if we see a business coming in, whether it's a person putting up a sign, a construction company, a landscaper, they'll be stopped. They'll be asked, have you got a license to do business in Port Moody? So we have, in comparison to the other municipalities, a significantly higher number of people taking out mobile licenses. Where the potential decrease comes in is all of those people buying their mobile licenses in Port Moody in the future would be buying them in Coquitlam, where their business is based, or in Port Coquitlam.
So all of the revenue that all three municipalities collect currently for non-resident mobile licenses equals a certain amount, and of that certain amount, 53% of all that amount is Port Moody's.
That's correct.
Okay. So how exactly does that line up with the later slides? Where does the 53% come into play with the proposed revenue sharing that we saw later?
The revenue sharing that's proposed is out of that fee. Let's say someone in Coquitlam has a business, they come, they pay their regular Coquitlam business license fee. They pay the $165. Yeah. At this point, the formula is such that a quarter of that would go to Port Moody, a quarter of that would go to Port Coquitlam, and 50% of that would stay in Coquitlam. And as is borne out in a future slide, that ensures that really we're all just sitting at a break even with a very slight increase to our revenues.
I think it's important to recognize that each city will continue to collect its own business license, whatever the fee is.
I understand
so we're
that.
just talking about splitting, we're talking about putting the $165 into a pot and then splitting that $165 according to the traditional
quarter, a half.
Yep.
So why wasn't it divided up according to the 50, let's say 50, 30, 20 to round it out here? Because I don't quite get why you introduced this fact and then said that you're not going to go with that breakdown. Am I comparing apples to oranges here?
Yeah.
I think it's because our premise was to not have anybody lose as a result. So the numbers had to be juggled in order that through the pilot project, we would not have a situation where Port Moody lost or Coquitlam lost or POCO lost. We would have a basis by which, on some assumptions obviously, a basis by which they would come out a little bit ahead in each case.
Is that the next slide?
There's how it would shake out. With a 10% increase in compliance, the pot grows by $6,000.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, I get it now. Good. Thank you very much. Yeah,
There you go. I'm really hopeful we've got it. I'm hopeful that this one works. Oops, Councillor Robinson.
I actually just want to take a moment and thank the three of you for stepping up. I know that it's not often easy to make sure that we're doing a good job of representing our own constituents and also working together. And so I hope this is, I know this is a step in the right direction, and I hope this is an example for the other ways that the three cities can collaborate. But I want you to know that the three of you, I think, have really stepped up and set the bar for all of us for future projects. So thank you.
Thank you for that, and it reminds me of an item that we need to focus on, and that is that we're here first. This is the first output from this group to a council, and because of everybody's schedule and because of council schedules and different procedures that certain have committees and what have you, we won't be doing this specific presentation today at POCO or today at Port Moody. And so we have a plan as to when we are going to do that. It isn't finalized entirely yet, but it has to do with committees, and we're trying to get this done so that we can have, by year end, the output production and be able to do the whole bylaw thing. So sooner rather than later, it's going to happen at Port Moody's council and at our council. And in my case, in POCO, it might end up being at a briefing session or a committee, which is not quite the same as what you have here. In any event, the idea is not to be just producing the information here and then forgetting about going to the rest. We are going to all three councils with all three of us doing the same presentation, but it'll take a little time for that to get. And the press, I'm hoping, is listening.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, it was about a year ago that for the first time, I don't know whether it's in history, but at least the first time in ages, if not in history, the three councils had dinner together and sat down and chatted about some issues, and we've done it a couple times now, and I look forward to that process continuing to unfold in lots of constructive ways for our common residents. So thank you all three for what you did. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Next item is our first report of staff. It's the report of the General Manager of Planning and Development and the Fire Chief. It pertains to proposed interface wildfire mitigation strategies. The report is for information.
Councillor Reamer on receipt. Councillor Nicholson seconds. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4 is a report of the General Manager of Parks, Recreation, and Culture Services, and it pertains to pet cemetery services. Again, the report is for information.
Second.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Reid. We actually, last week, we did take a break on this issue. We set it on the table for a week because Councillor Reid wasn't here, and of all the people around the table, you might have had the strongest feelings on the subject.
Well, I do and I don't. I think it's odd that you couldn't have a columbarium wall surrounding our cemetery that could have pet remains in it. I just don't see that. Burial in ground, I understand. But if I had to, I don't know that there's that great, and I don't know how this came forward actually, but I don't know why. Is there a great outcry out there for us to have a pet cemetery?
Through the chair, thank you. No, we've not had requests come through from the community on this. This report is following up from an inquiry of council from June 2011.
Oh, right, okay. But there's not a great deal of people running around. So to me, if I were to do anything along this line, I would probably look at a piece of property that we may have close to one of our cemeteries and use just a wall, a columbarium like we have now, niches, and that would be probably the extent I would ever go. So I guess if you just want to receive it, we can, but I don't think there's any place that we have that we could do that right now. Perhaps in the Northeast, or if we're going to rebuild another cemetery at some time, we could look to putting a columbarium in.
And did you want to address the question of whether the two can be co-located?
I'm going to ask Lanny England, who was the lead on this particular report, to share with us the results of his inquiry on regarding the Cremation, Interment, and Funeral Services Act.
So, yeah, the provincial legislation does prohibit any other use on a site that's been identified and registered as a cemetery. So that would include the use of a columbarium for pet remains. Wouldn't be permitted on the cemetery property.
I think we need to change that.
Okay, well, I'll concur. I can't contemplate that that's entirely makes a lot of sense. But Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I mean, if there's no demand, I don't know that we should be acting on this, but this idea of a columbarium, I'm thinking, and in the report talks about that alternatives to full service pet cemetery that could benefit pet owners would be to designate an area where pet owners could bring their pets' cremated remains to be placed. It's like a columbarium and a memorial plaque. Is that something that, if there was demand, that we would consider perhaps in one of our parks? Would that be inappropriate? Or do we have to have a specially designated area that would act as a cemetery of sorts?
So, through the chair, certainly the department works with families and individuals that want to make a gift for parks, and sometimes that is in memory of all kinds of things, celebration of life events, a whole range of meaningful things that happen in the lives of our community members. And so certainly where we've had individuals that would like to make a gift of a tree or a bench or another feature, and to have as the stimulus of that the passing of a loved pet is completely appropriate, and it would be completely supported. We limit the kinds of memorials that we have on public lands, and that is more being sensitive to the broad public that uses our parklands, and some resistance that the public has in, as they're enjoying their morning constitutional, to be faced with a lot of memorial plaques. There is some resistance to that by the general public, and so we manage that carefully and in a balanced way, but certainly we do have programs that do provide for that. And you know, let's face it, we are certainly aware that people take ashes from pets and scatter them on public lands all over the world. And that's not something that is managed. That does happen. We don't have an active program that encourages or facilitates that, but nor do we have an active program that really restricts it either. Certainly staff can take away the interest that Council has on this as we're developing new parks and working with our colleagues related to other public lands to see if there are further initiatives that we can do to generally support this, but it's not at this point featuring as a high priority item for our business plan in 2013.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. I certainly recognize that a great many people have very strong feelings towards their pets, and certainly sympathize with them when they lose that pet. But there are also very strong feelings among many different peoples, different religions, and different ethnicities, different cultures about the proper relationship between a human cemetery and a place where the remains of animals are disposed. And this is in direct response to Councillor Reid's recommendation that perhaps there could be a wall near an existing cemetery or something like that could be used to commemorate animals. There are many people who would find that quite offensive, actually. So I would say that one should keep it as far away from a human cemetery that many people view as sacred territory, sacred ground. If in any event that, if in some event that the city were to want to get into this business, that it should be a site that's as far away as possible from a human cemetery. But I would not recommend that the city get into this. It could be, I think, more properly handled as a private matter, and I certainly have no problem with people disposing of ashes in the middle of a park or something like that. As Ms. McKay said, that there's no active program to support that or to oppose that, and that's fine. But my major issue for speaking here is dealing with the human pet sort of interface when it comes to burial, and those should not be mixed. I did some research on this a couple of weeks ago when it first came before us, and there's been issues, especially in Europe, actually, dealing with this particular thing where it's been quite controversial when this is attempted to mix the two things together. Those are my comments. So it's just something to keep in mind, and I would not recommend that we pursue this any further. Thank you.
Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. You know, how did you define a pet? What is it? You know, is a cat and a dog, or is it a horse? Is it a snake? Is it turtle? Is it many other things can be pets? People have things that they call pets. Well, you know, how do you define it? Now, can anybody answer me that? No.
I suspect it's usually just referred to as companion animals. Yes.
Yeah. No.
But
all depends. You know, when you ask certain people what's a companion to you, they can tell you all kinds of things that are pets to them, and they're companions for them. We have a cat at home, and the cat owns the whole place. I mean, there's no question about it. You know, a great animal, love him, love the cat and everything else, but should it be buried where the human beings are buried? I don't think so. You know, or have a wall in there? I don't think so. But again, you know, you'd have to define what is really a pet. Yeah. And I know what you're saying, Mayor, but you know what? There's many people will define other animals that are pets still. And other be, you know, like one guy in the United States had a cobra snake. It was his pet. You know? Okay? Is that something that would not be allowed because not a pet, although he says it is?
Your Worship, certainly at this stage of the work, staff have not gone to formulating a definitive definition of pet. We certainly agree Councillor Sikora's observation that the range of pets is very broad, and looking at the industry of pet services, it does include exotic animals as well as domestic cats and dogs and guppies and budgies and a whole range of animals. And this exploration did not get into making a definition of pet, but we would agree that it would be a complex matter. And historically in Canada, many animals that have been companions of families have, their remains have ended up in the yards or things like that. And again, you could be talking about a goldfish or a canary or a cat or a dog. And there is a history within families of how these things have been handled. Some of them are handled very ceremoniously. Others, it's more not as obvious, something maybe that isn't even shared among the whole family members. Somehow just an animal disappears and the history of what has happened isn't known. So it has been dealt with as a private matter within families. There has been a private sector provider in some communities for this. It's not an area that's traditionally a public service area for local government.
So there's a lot of work to be done on it.
No, we're not doing
it. We're going to move ahead.
No, we're not going to move ahead.
Okay.
So in answer to the question, if we were to move ahead, there's a lot of work to be done on this. I catch around the table the consensus that we're thankful that you have followed up with a request that Council made a year and a bit ago, and that the report is sufficient to suggest that we'd be well advised to move. Let sleeping dogs lay. I can't believe Councillor Robinson. Oh. Oh, stop. And no one mentioned rabbits. Mr. Clerk.
We have a motion to receive on the floor.
Thank you. Motion is to receive. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Report item 5 is a report of the General Manager of Engineering and Public Works. It pertains to local area services, and this is a proposed policy change. We have some introductory comments by the General Manager, and the report is for information.
Thanks, Your Worship. A while back, Council decided to amend the cost share, the cost split for the LAS program. In that discussion, there were a number of other issues that were discussed, and we have listed those issues. If you turn to Appendix 3 of the report, you'll see a summary of the recommendations that staff are comfortable with at our level. If a committee is comfortable with forwarding those recommendations on to Council, they can be forwarded on, and we would get on with business accordingly, or committee can suggest other directions. This is really for discussion and to confirm the direction that we're going in. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. I fully support the recommendations, but pertaining to your ask regarding whether we're going to reimburse the Surf Crescent Tide Place and Armada Street, just wondering how many other projects have we done prior to that? Prior to 2009?
Historically or recently?
Historically.
Right,
no,
right. We were only considering those three, but I'll turn it to Mark. I don't have that top of mind.
Sure, through the chair. Local area service projects go all the way back to the 40s with various, it started with various utility type improvements and then progressed into more curb and gutter improvements, sidewalk improvements.
I was referring more to more recent, say 2000 to 2009.
That's why I asked.
Yeah.
Okay, from 2000 on, these are the three. There was from about 2001 on, I should say, that these are the only ones.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, there was a logical reason why those were the three that we were considering. Councillor Hodge.
I just, on the question on page 2, at the top, bullet 3, only support LAS curb and gutter projects where paving is needed. And I know that we had a discussion because that there is a cost efficiency of doing the two together. But I thought that at one point we were sort of discussing two pricing, that we would give them a bigger break if they timed it with potential road rehab. And I'm just wondering, just looking for some clarification on that. If the road has been done 2-3 years ago and they didn't get curbs and gutters and now they want curbs and gutters, can they still participate at a cost-sharing formula, or obviously otherwise they got to wait 15 years until it comes back around again to get the cost-sharing? So I just wonder if you could just review again for me what we determined to do on curbs and gutters versus doing it now or tying it into a public works project.
I'll lead off with a couple comments and then ask Mr. Zaborniak to add as well. I guess my first comment is that maybe the word only support is too strong. Just top of mind, we would certainly want to prioritize our investments in LAS projects to where paving is needed. You know, there could be a situation where what you describe occurs. The pavement rehab was done at the time the community is asked. They say no. Some years go by and they say, well, we've reconsidered. I guess we would have to consider that on its own merits. They could certainly apply. But once you've already done the fundamental rehab, the pavement work, the costs associated with redoing it with curb and gutter, because the problem is that the drainage profile of the road changes, the costs will go up very, very significantly. They would probably also, I suppose that they could apply and say we really want it, and we could bring it forward for council's consideration. But because the drainage characteristics of the road are changing as well, they would be faced with a much larger bill. And from a staff perspective, from maintaining the infrastructure and prioritizing where your scarce dollars go, we'd be coming from the perspective of, well, the road is in very good shape. There's really no great infrastructure gain to change it now. It's fundamentally cosmetic. We would probably recommend from that perspective not to do it from just simply looking at city priorities, but the council of the day could say, no, that's okay, our preference is to go ahead with that project. But that project, I can assure you, would be much, much more expensive to do anyway, and I suspect that those residents would be quite shocked with the additional bill that would be incurred in having to regrade the road and redo the pavement all over again. I hope that helps. Maybe it's just the choice of words that are too strong, but I would say we would definitely prioritize it.
And I think that, as you've explained it, when we're doing curb and gutter, it's not a linear foot charge, because each road is going to have different work that's required. So just because it costs this much on Street B doesn't mean that it's going to cost the same on Street C, and particularly at what stage we are in potentially doing road rehab. And as I recall, what we were going to do was go out to those residents a year or two ahead of time, say, we're coming into your neighborhood, here's your chance. I know that we have, some residents chose to do it under a different funding formula, and we're looking at sort of going back to a system. I think equally we will have some residents that say, well, geez, we passed it up because we thought it was going to cost us this, and now we find out that there's a better funding, sharing formula. We'd like to now proceed. But what we're saying is that it may not be that easy, because if the road was done in such a way that it's not just an add-on, that it may in fact, even with the new funding formula, may be a very expensive project now that the work's been done. So I think I've got that right.
That's fundamentally correct. The best time to do it is when the road is already in bad shape. That's the best bang for the buck for everyone.
Good, thank you.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to get clear on what we mean by 75% relaxation related to flankage properties. Living on a corner lot myself, already have curb and gutter, but so.
Sure, I'll ask Mark to speak to the details. It's essentially to relieve corner properties from essentially double jeopardy, if you want, and I'll let Mark speak to that.
Yeah, Bill's correct through the chair. It's without relief on the corner property, the corner property ends up paying a great deal because they pay for their frontage as well as full price on the side yard. So other cities do the flankage relief. Vancouver's, when they had a program, they've deferred it for now. They did that, and also Burnaby has the same thing. There's relief for the corner properties.
Okay, I'm actually trying to understand the math. So we've got a 60 by 140 lot on a corner. 60 feet on the front. All the houses up the street, they're all 60-foot front. So everybody's the same except the guy on the corner who's got 200 feet of frontage. What does a 75% relaxation drop that frontage to?
Okay, well, for the frontage, it wouldn't change. But if the project happens to be on the side street where your flankage is, you'd only pay, based on that street, 25% of the cost. So it would be as if you only had 35 feet, I guess, on that street. So you pay for 35 feet of it, you get the relief on the remainder.
I see. Okay. And point 4 in the recommendations, eliminate the hurdle that property owners need to show 2/3 support on return petitions prior to council consideration. To my mind, that was an important limitation as I saw it in the past, because it precluded the possibility that we could effectively have 50% plus one group of homeowners effectively imposing taxation on their neighbors, on half of them. And so the 2/3 I thought was there to show that there was significant community support. And it's, as I understand, it wasn't based on all the property owners, it was based on those who spoke up. So if I were the activist on the block wanting curb and gutter on my street, I could work my neighbors and try and get them to return their petitions in favor. And it doesn't seem to me to be that tough a hurdle, not as it's not based on all the properties, but only on those who choose to participate in the process. Can you speak a little to why we want to drop it down?
I'll take the first stab. It definitely drops the bar if we're trying to increase the number of LAS projects. We've had 3 in the past 10 or so plus years, and so we are looking for ways to increase that. But it does bump up against the very issue that Councillor Nicholson mentions, which is it would only take 50% plus one, not necessarily a higher bar to, let's say, be very sure that that particular block wants it. This one definitely is a choice of council. If council wants to drop that bar, we would likely have an easier process, if you will, in getting these curb and gutter projects through. But the local block approval would also drop. And I guess that's something to think through. From a perspective of staff, we're coming from the lens of, let's make these projects easier. But this could be of some interest to other members of council also.
And I think that from a good job of managing our city point of view, it's desirable to get these things done as we repave. It makes maintenance of the roads easier. It has a variety of benefits to the city as a whole, having more curb and gutter and less gravel shoulders. Is that right?
Thank you, and I would agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. I absolutely support these changes. I think it's the right direction, and as for the idea that we could incur as a neighborhood, impose some costs on one of our neighbors by incurring some improvement on the neighborhood. We do that as a council all the time. We build a swimming pool and impose the costs on everybody, even though 80% of them didn't answer the petition the last time we asked. Only 20% showed up to vote, and yet the costs of the pool or the cost of the ice arena are shared by all. So I think this is a much more democratic process, and it allows neighborhoods to really get involved in their decisions. And I would urge neighbors to get together, discuss these proposals, and ultimately it's their neighborhood that will benefit from the investment that the city is willing to share in. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, this is just a follow-up to Councillor Nicholson's last question regarding the 2/3 versus 50% plus one. In the detailed explanation on page 4, the bottom point explains that the new policy would modify the old one so that only the community charter rules apply before an LAS project is considered by council. In other words, eliminate the hurdle that property owners need to show 2/3 support on returned petition. What exactly are the community charter rules? Are there specific community charter rules for LASs, or just general rules dealing with engaging the public?
Mr. Suzak.
Yeah, Your Worship, the community charter has specific language about how LAS is conducted, and the community charter mentions the involvement of 50% of, I believe, the property value of a block. That is a decision factor. I'm going to ask Mark to chime in too. He may have a better recollection of it.
Yeah, yes, it has to be at least, as Bill notes, at least 50% of the value, the assessed value on the block, as well as at least 50% of the owners representing the properties on the block.
Okay, so it doesn't stipulate, it doesn't prohibit us from having a higher threshold. It just says that it has to be at least that.
That's correct.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none. I need a motion to receive.
Second.
Oh, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you. Motion to receive, and I believe the General Manager indicated desire to have a motion of support for the appendix so that it goes to Council in order to effect approval of the proposed policy change.
Okay. I've got a motion by Councillor Reamer to support the receipt and support of Appendix 3 recommendations. Is that seconded? I did. Seconded by Councillor Reid. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm quite prepared to move this forward and have it come back to us for decision, but at that time I'd like to know where our neighboring municipalities are on the 50% 2/3 question. That's one that I am not decided on by any means. Thank you.
Okay. The motion is receipt and recommendations. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Next item, item 6, is a report of the Deputy City Manager. It pertains to the 2012 to 2015 strategic plan. We have introductory comments by the Deputy City Manager, followed by a presentation by the Manager of Corporate Planning. The report is for information.
Thank you very much. The draft 2012 to 2015 strategic plan is before Council today for your information and comment. This document represents a corporate effort from our executive team that was led by Michelle Hunt, our Manager of Corporate Planning. I believe this document improves on our original strategic plan established in 2006 in that it builds on the vision and strategic directions from that plan by adding outcomes and measures that will help us to evaluate how well we do in terms of implementing the plan. And I'd just like to acknowledge Michelle's good work in terms of providing that additional rigor in this year's version of the plan. Michelle has a short presentation for Council now that will just run through the 2012 document and how it works. And with that, I'll turn things over to Michelle.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. As John said, I'm just going to do a brief presentation on the City of Coquitlam's strategic plan for 2012 to 2015. As you're aware, in 2006, the City developed a strategic plan which included a 15-year vision and 5 strategic goals, as well as a set of strategic directions that would show how we're going to implement those goals. Every 3 years, we take a step back and look at that plan and make sure it still reflects where we're going and what's happening in our community, in our environment. We are a rapidly changing community, and it's a good thing to step back and have a look. And as well, planning is a continuous process, and as we respond to those changes, we're constantly developing new or updating our plans and strategies, and it's important that the strategic plan, that top-level plan, is aligned with the other documents that the City uses. So this day started in April. It was a consultative process. We started off with our Ipsos Reid survey, which was of 600 residents. We also did 2 online surveys. One was the Ipsos Reid survey that we put online and had just over 60 residents fill that one out, as well as a stakeholder survey that I did, which is sort of a little bit broader, and there was just over 40 residents that filled that one out. I also did a number of meetings with stakeholders, including Council's advisory committees, a group of people at the Glen Pine Pavilion, the Youth Council, and then we had input from staff in September. So as I mentioned, in 2006, the City developed this vision, which is that Coquitlam will be a community of neighbourhoods within a vibrant urban city where people of all ages, abilities, and cultures choose to live, learn, work, and play. And that vision, we're going to achieve that vision by 5 strategic goals, which is to strengthen neighbourhoods, expand local jobs and local prosperity, increase active participation and creativity, enhance sustainability of our services and infrastructure, and achieve excellence in governance. So how are we going to do all that? This is where the plan comes into play. So the strategic goals are what we wish to achieve to reach that vision. We then translate those into strategic directions, which are the major approaches or policies or programs that we're going to use to attain those goals. We then take those strategic directions, and on an annual basis we actually look at, okay, what specific projects, what specific initiatives are we going to do over the next year or the next couple of years that fall within those strategic directions. Next is looking at our measurements and how we're doing, and I'm going to speak about that a little bit later in the presentation. And then the review and update process, which is what we're in currently right now. Looking back at what we've done and celebrating our successes and learning from mistakes and moving forward. As part of the consultation, there were a number of priorities that came up. Transportation continuing to be the top one. Evergreen Line is coming, and we're well prepared for that with our Evergreen Line project team and the resources we've set aside. Other issues around public transit in certain areas, parking, road congestion. So transportation still continues to be the top priority. Land use and housing, we're a growing population, and accommodating all the new folks that are moving to our community is also a priority. And one of the strategies that Council just endorsed was the transit-oriented development strategy that helps address some of these issues. And the next one is neighbourhoods and people. And actually, it was interesting. I started this process at the same time that the Vancouver Foundation released its survey on, it's called Connections and Engagement, and looking at how people feel within their communities and their neighbourhoods. And there were about 200 Coquitlam residents that were included in that survey. And one of the things that came out was, around socialization and social isolation and getting people engaged within their community. And so it was an interesting level of discussions that I had with the stakeholder groups around this and what we can do. And I think Coquitlam's vision is great in that it speaks to a community of neighborhoods and still remembering that we have all these distinct neighborhoods and building on that and continuing to try and get that connection within the neighborhood. Environment, our environment is something that our residents really highly value. It's something they see as distinctive about Coquitlam, our mountains, our rivers, our fish, the salmon, as the youth council said to me. And preserving that as we move forward, I think, is a priority. And lastly is around City Hall and continuing to manage our finances prudently, being efficient in everything we do, optimizing our facilities where we can. So those are some of the high-level priorities that came out of the consultation. As I mentioned, measurement is an evolving process. It's something that the city's been doing for a long time. They had a number of key indicators, and last year I sort of grouped those together and developed this performance report, which had the actual key indicators as well as some accomplishments. As part of this process, I went to staff and when we looked at those measures, and we've updated some of them and tweaked them. But performance measurement is something that continues, and it's something we actually have to be careful with so that it doesn't balloon out of control, because it's very easy to keep adding measures. But I think for me, it's, are we measuring the things we want to change? Are we measuring what's important to the city? And that's what I'm going to be focusing on to make sure that we don't just keep adding measures, that we're measuring what's important. As well as, you'll notice that we have key performance indicators within the goals, but also some strategic long-term measures, and I think there needs to be a link between those. As I mentioned, from an annual basis, we have the key performance indicators. We also have our results, which are the actual new policies, programs, infrastructure that's going to come out of those business plan priorities, as well as the quantitative measures. I looked at a number of our plans, like the Strategic Transportation Plan, our Community Greenhouse Gas Reduction Strategy, and we have long-term measures in there, in those plans. And so I've incorporated those into the strategic plan, and as I mentioned, somehow we need to, those are long-term, but we need to gauge how we're doing more frequently so we don't get to 2021 and go, oh, we've missed the boat on that one. Somehow we need to be checking in. As well as looking at the long-term benefits. And I think the key thing around the strategic measures is these are items that we have, they're within our sphere of influence, but not necessarily within total control. Whereas the annual ones, we have control over those. They're more tangible to us. These ones they're influenced by other organizations and just other things that are going on within our environment. One of the other things I did was, because we are constantly growing and changing, is look at our other plans. And the strategic plan is supposed to be a high-level document. It doesn't get down to the nitty-gritty about what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, how we're going to do it. It is supposed to be sort of that high level. But what I wanted to make sure is that everything we say in the strategic plan is actually supported by some other strategy out there. And for the most part, I think they are. So I just wanted to let you know that, yeah, I went through and made sure that there is some alignment. So the next steps, I'm going to incorporate the feedback you give me today, and we'll post this on the city website for 2 to 3 weeks, and then I'll incorporate any feedback I get there and bring it back to you at the beginning of December for approval. At that point, I'll turn it over to corporate communications, who will make it a lovely document. And that's it.
Outstanding. Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. This is another one of those favorite reports because I find it just so, it's such a great opportunity to reflect on what we're doing and why we're here and you're here. But I have a whole bunch of questions and thoughts about it. But before I get into that, I just want to comment and acknowledge how far we've come in 4 or 5 years from where we were to where we're at. And I'm very pleased to see that we're constantly renewing and reviewing what it is that we're doing, monitoring where we're at, and are we doing the things that we say we would do. So with that in mind, I have a few, I guess, questions and observations. One of them is I really like how we got some feedback currently from folks about what we're doing, but it's not clear to me where we see that feedback specifically in the document. So, for example, one of the in the environmental scan, one of the things that came out was preservation and natural environment is a theme that you heard a lot of. And I didn't see in the document a lot of actions that was about that. So I did see that we're going to do parks and we're going to do open spaces and public spaces, but I didn't see a lot in the document that spoke to preserve the natural environment. And so how do we reconcile that? And I think it's important that, and if we aren't doing that, that maybe that needs to come to council for a discussion piece on how do we do that. So it was a bit of a disconnect, and I don't know if you have any thoughts about what we do with that.
Yeah, for me, I think around the tangible piece was around preserving our open spaces, and I can let Laurie speak to that a bit more. But I think it's more buried in everything we do. As we do our land use planning and our neighborhood plans and our area plans, it's sort of something to keep in the back of our mind. Hey, our residents really like our natural spaces, and they want to keep them. And
yeah, and I think they would argue that we're not doing a very good job. So and that's the political stuff, and I get that. But maybe the tree bylaw or something might take care of that. But I'm just trying to reconcile, and I don't think when people say preserving natural environment, I don't think they're talking to parks and open spaces. I think they are talking about what they consider our natural wooded, even though I know that they're managed forests, but that's how I hear them talking about that. But I just think it's something that I'm not sure that we're capturing it in our strategic plan in a real meaningful way. The other thought that I had, a couple of them, had to do with the idea of where we're getting our data from, and I'm pleased to see that we're using our own information, but there's a whole bunch of other people in our community doing a whole bunch of other work, and I don't want to imply that we ought to be all things to all people, because we're not, and I don't think we ought to be, but the work that others are doing in our community helps us understand the community that we're serving. So, for example, the school district has EDI scores, educational determinant inventories, indicators, and so that, for me, I find that really helpful to know where we have children with particular needs, and that I would hope would influence this council about making decisions about parks and recreation. But if we don't have access to that data, we won't know that. So I don't want to make more work for you, but I also want to recognize that we're not the only ones providing service in this community, and I know that there's a bit of a social planning table started, but that's the stuff that I think that table provides us with, is opportunities to understand how others are assessing the community and how we can participate in filling gaps. So I think looking beyond what data does School District 43 have? What data does Share and the hospitals have in terms of how healthy our community is? I mean, you can keep going and going and going, and I get that. But if all we're doing is gathering our data, then we're only gathering data on stuff that we currently do. But there might be others who are doing other things that have data that might help us tweak what we're doing. Does that make sense?
It does, although I think there's a difference between using data to figure out how we're going to move forward versus using data to assess where, how well we've done. So for me, those performance measures are sort of the looking back, or are we measuring what we want to change or improve versus using data to look at what we should be improving going forward. So
I see what you're saying, but I think that it becomes circular in that you only monitor the things that you're currently doing, and you're really not learning about the gaps and saying, well, yeah, we got 95% on this, that means we should keep doing what we're doing. But if you're missing out on a whole bunch of stuff, then maybe that's actually not what you should be doing. Maybe you should be doing something different. So I don't want us, it's that silo thing, right? So and I know that we're challenged organizationally to get out of our silos, and I think we've done a really good job and looking across, but the city itself doesn't operate in a silo either, that there are others who are doing other great things. And so I don't want us to only look at our silo. I just don't think that that's like you even referred to the Vancouver Foundation and the work that they've done and how influential that was. So again, I think it's helpful to constantly be looking outside, not just inside. The same thing with the strength of our neighborhood associations. So we talk about strengthening our neighborhoods, but I didn't say anything about our neighborhood associations, and I wonder if they're an indicator of. I don't know, but I'm asking the question about what the Vancouver Foundation had asked about isolation. How do we measure that? And I don't know if that's a tool, but again, it's something that's outside the city, connected to the city, but we don't provide comment, or we don't assess their strength and their capacity. So it's just a thought. And the same thing with the economy, the local economy. I think the strength of our Chamber of Commerce and our BIAs, their memberships, and our, they're examples of the strength of our local economy. That if they're doing well and they're organized, I think that those are some other indicators. Again, it's like sort of looking a little bit outside of.
And yes, and especially on the economic indicators, originally I'd started off with some census data, and some data comes from BC Stats. And the trouble with using that, we want to be able to use this over time and see it change. And the census is every 5 years, and it didn't really, and sometimes they report on it, and sometimes they don't. And so that's sort of why I use that fallback position, is to know our own data, because I know what we're going to have it. I know we're going to be consistently measuring the same thing. So I understand what you're saying. I actually like the Chamber of Commerce membership, but there is that. I don't want to use a measure and then, next year find out, okay, well, they're not doing that anymore.
Right. Well, whereas a Chamber membership, I mean, they do that every year, and that would help. That would help to support that. I have a couple of other minor things, and I'll catch up with you later. But I think that's actually no. There is one more. No, never mind. I'll share it with you later. Thanks.
Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thanks. I think it's a tremendous report and really valuable for the whole organization, for us, and if the citizens of Coquitlam could take a few minutes to look at it, I think it would be valuable for them too. I have my one, are they nits to pick? Maybe not. It's about the ubiquity of the term sustainability. Into the basket of sustainability, we currently measure our ability to get matching funds for projects and cutting carbon emissions and things like that. I think when most people hear the term sustainability, they think of environmental measures and things like that. Can you explain why it is, and just to be very specific here, we have on, let's see here, our first reference to sustainability would be on attachment A, under enhanced sustainability of city services and infrastructure, and the 2011 measures all have to do with hardware type stuff. We opened a new King Edward overpass, which provides a direct connection between Millardville and Fraser Mills. Purchased new space, Pine Tree Way for the library. Completed road improvements. I think I have a hard time understanding exactly how that's sustainable. The next reference and I'm not criticizing the completion of those projects. I'm just not sure if these are in the right basket. We move sort of over to, now what are we now, in the actual draft plan for 2012-2015. We again talk about in number 6, ensure sustainable, equitable, and effective funding strategies to enable the city to provide a high quality and appropriate level of infrastructure services. Again, that's kind of hardware type stuff. But then on the last page of attachment B, we do talk about enhanced sustainability of city services infrastructure, and there we talk more about environmental measures. So perhaps you can just talk to me about why all of these things are in the same basket.
I think sustainability is made up of 3 components. There's economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability. And this particular goal also speaks to our infrastructure sustainability. So I think the reason you're seeing sort of the facilities under sustainability, it's making sure that we continue to have the facilities into the future. I mean, sustainability is about maintaining what we have into the future. So I think that's why you see those particular projects. But there's 3. There's economic sustainability, which is making sure that we have the money to do what we want to do, into the future. There's the environment, which is what everybody thinks about when they think about it. And then there's the social. And the social sustainability, there I've looked at things like quality of life. Are we maintaining a quality of life? Are we keeping this high quality of life that we're providing to our citizens? So I really do see it as three facets. It's hard to fit all of those into one goal. I mean, you know, the plan is supposed to be high level, and it's already a number of pages long. So I've sort of tried to pick key parts. But there are definitely three components. And I would say under the economic sustainability is where you find your infrastructure type sustainability.
Yeah,
does that help?
Sort of strikes me as if not a shotgun marriage, maybe a marriage of convenience. Because the word sustainability is there, but it really doesn't strike me, and I think most people looking at it, they wouldn't think that those are all what they consider to be sustainable. But I understand your logic. That's good there. Now, the other thing isn't specifically, but I do want to mention specifically about your report, but it is something that I was looking at, because the report does remind us all about what the city's vision is. And I just want to read that vision out. That's on, where is that? Executive summary of the draft strategic plan, page 1 at the very top in the shaded box. Coquitlam in 2021 will be a community of neighborhoods within a vibrant urban city where people of all ages, abilities, and cultures choose to live, learn, work, and play. Now, I wasn't around when this vision was drafted, but I'm wondering why, and maybe you know, or maybe somebody who was around when this vision was agreed upon, chose just these three characteristics, age, ability, and culture, to choose to live, hoping they all choose to live, learn, work, and play here. It can be expanded. There's so many different ways. I mean, it gets pretty dangerous sometimes. Actually, you want to try to name every certain thing. But I can see somebody who might say, well, it doesn't say anything about my sex or my sexual orientation. It doesn't say anything about my religion. It doesn't say anything about my race. Why are they wanting to welcome everybody just based on age, ability, and culture? To my mind, I would just say welcoming everyone, where everyone is welcome to live, learn, work, and play. Do you have any background on why these specific three characteristics were included in the vision?
I don't. I wasn't around when that was developed. I will say that within the current strategic plan, that there's about a page of, it says that if we fulfill this vision, here are the things that we've done, and I left my plan by my chair there, but maybe that expands on it a little bit further, but I'm not sure if the Deputy City Manager can answer your question.
I wasn't here at that time either, so I'm not sure why they limited to age, ability, and culture, although that is kind of all-encompassing, but...
No, not really. I don't think... Some of the more senior people back there, no, or maybe long-time council members. Anybody remember why we chose just these three characteristics? And why we just didn't simply say everyone?
Jim is the only one left.
And I had no part of it.
One thing I have heard is that sometimes we do use too many words.
Yeah,
so we will think about that, and then finally, maybe there is a place to simplify, because sometimes when you get into some specifics, then some people feel left out, and maybe it is better to simplify it a little bit.
Right.
So I got an advisement.
Yes, that would be my recommendation. Just simply say everyone, and you don't leave anybody out when you say everyone, but you leave people out when you get specific like this.
I did just grab a copy of the strategic, and it says achieving this vision will result in a community that celebrates the unique history, heritage, character of its neighborhoods, that values diversity and welcomes everyone, where people feel safe and secure, offering housing choices for all. It goes on and just sort of describes it, but I agree with you. I like the change.
Good. Okay. So that was not a nit. That was maybe more of a gnat. And just one response to something that Councillor Robinson talked about, just to get my point of view. You talked about, Councillor Robinson talked about the desire to preserve the natural environment, and she, I think, quite correctly said that we there's very little natural environment in Coquitlam. You could probably argue that there's nothing entirely natural left in Coquitlam, perhaps part of the Burke Pinecone Provincial Park. No, I'm not saying. What we have, and I think she's right, what we have are facsimiles of natural environments that people really do enjoy. But you could say that Glen Park might have been one of those facsimiles, and if that's the case, then we certainly didn't preserve that. But I do believe that we did a real service to the community by developing that area. So I'm not sure how useful a goal to preserve the natural environment is. Maybe we can look at refining that, get a different word to reflect what's actually going on here and what the characteristics of Coquitlam actually are. And that's my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. This was a great report, and it really connects what we're doing with our business plan priorities, etc. There's just a couple of things with respect to achieving excellence in city governance that I didn't really see, but then I understand this is at a higher level, and I understand that the language we're using with respect to the strategic directions is more general in nature. And that's possibly why you haven't come out and said, but one of the things that we've been working on for the last 4 years, and which I think we all acknowledge that there's been a huge improvement, is in the delivery of our customer service. And it doesn't come specifically out in the strategic directions to address that. It does say focus on service excellence through innovation, high standards, and a commitment to continuous improvement. Certainly that's a part of it. But for the average Joe that's reading this report, that may not translate in the way that we want it to for our general public. And so that's just one suggestion I have. The other is in your results, and you've got your results listed here on page 12, but then you've also got results in the chart, which is attachment A. And you've nothing about staff's great work on our outdated rules. And so I was surprised about that. There again, that sends a message to our public, and it's not covered there. The other thing I wanted to ask about is under our strategic goal of expanding local jobs and local prosperity, number 7, where we've said create trade and investment opportunities by building our international relationships. And then under results, of course, you've got support for the international education programs in Coquitlam. But there's really nothing else with respect to the building of those international relationships, either in your results here or your chart otherwise. And I know that we have participated in trade missions, and I hope that we work on that particular area in the future as well. But those are just a couple of things that weren't speaking out to me loudly through this report. Thank you.
Okay. I have a couple of comments, quite a few comments myself, and I'm trying to try and restrict them because we have a full day. One of the original ones, and I've mentioned it a few years back, that our strategic goals aren't personal. They don't relate to people as much as the one we always fall back on when a staff report comes in, for example, to build a homeless shelter or something, and we fall back on strengthens neighborhoods, because none of our strategic goals are to help anyone. They are to help neighborhoods or to help jobs or to help prosperity. The health of individuals is not among the things we strategically have as goals. Even as, and if you flip through to, sorry, I'm trying to find it. There it is. Increase active participation and creativity, which is what's that, page 10. You won't find reference to one of my pets, one of my irritants, is the school traffic safety program, the school walkability, where clearly one of the goals of the walkability program, apart from the safety of the children, was the increasing the likelihood that they'd walk and became more active and would take a bike to school. And that one doesn't appear here. It appears under strengthens neighborhoods. I realize, and I'm not, again, I'm kind of like Councillor O'Neill, I'm not picking this apart, other than to wonder what the underlying assumptions were, the underlying decisions were, and quite often the underlying decision was driven by, as Councillor O'Neill says, the vision. I don't have much of a problem with the wording that Councillor O'Neill raises on the vision. I get the impression that we wanted to say it's broad. We wanted to call our mind specifically to all ages, because really the vision is the only place where we talk about people, all ages, all abilities, and that would, I assume someone was trying to deal with disabilities, and all cultures, and I assume by that they meant both race and creed as well, to be as expansive as possible in 4 words. And I don't have a problem with what it ended up doing. I don't have a problem with switching it to everyone, but I think that that's less than what we currently have. I don't think what we currently have is too specific, because it doesn't say both left and right-handed people. It doesn't say those other ways that we could expand it. But I think it was an attempt in as few words as possible to say this is everybody. So I'm going to, sorry, that was a bit of a rant. So how do we get the personal, how do we get the person back into this? Is it possible to have one of our strategic objectives, our strategic goals rather, be the health and safety of individuals rather than just the strengthening of neighborhoods?
Yeah, I can definitely take that away and probably work with Ms. McKay and you know, I know sort of around belonging and connection, you know, that was something that came up that, but from the health, sort of the physical health side of things and wellness, I think we can put a strategic direction in there. I think we are doing things as a city that, like the walkability program, that supports that. So putting a strategic direction in there would fit.
So it's odd. I read this in the context of the recent happenings, and quite often we do that. And one of the most recent tragedies that has befallen this community, I think everyone on council would like to see us perhaps partner with other agencies, such as the school board and other and Children of the Street or whatever, in identifying how the community can work better on the issue of bullying and the issue of online bullying and the issue of online harassment and worse, and other issues like that. And yet it's not in our, I couldn't figure out on the weekend how to fit that anywhere, because it doesn't strengthen neighborhoods as much as it protects individuals and expands the health and safety of our population. And so I don't know how I actually haven't had a chance to compare ours to other communities, but how would we, that's, I guess, it's not so much a question, but as a point. How would we make sure that our strategic goals include all of the things we strategically embrace as goals for our community?
Okay, so looking at how we can make it a goal then. Yeah, okay. I'll have a look at what other communities have done.
Okay. And I wanted to take issue with Glen Park, because Glen Park wasn't even a reasonable facsimile of a natural environment before, and there is no corner of Glen Park that is. Glen Park is unfortunately overrun today by homeless encampments, by drug paraphernalia, by litter, by garbage, by signs of fire and throughout. And when the work was being done in the north part of Glen Park, I had the opportunity to stop by because of some of the emails we were receiving and tour the area. And I remember there's one spot where a stump had been crushed by a piece of equipment, and I would estimate about 3,000 dog poop bags in this natural environment, in this park. And I think perhaps that's one of the things that Councillor O'Neill raises, is the fact that protecting what we have of environment is perhaps better wording than protecting the natural environment, because Mundy Park isn't a perfect natural environment, but it's what we have needs to be protected, and the constant deposits of every type of garbage, particularly dog poop bags, is something that we as a community ought to fight against. But I'm not going to argue that the improvements we made weren't in fact improvements, because I believe they were dramatic improvements to a park that had been challenged for decades. I had lots more, but I'll stop. Thank you so much. I must say that Council has made the comment, individual Council members and Council in general have made the comment that this is a brilliant piece of work, and that the work that you do, personally, the work that you do is much appreciated, Michelle, and we thank you very much for this effort, and we look forward to seeing this unfold.
Thank you very much.
The motion to receive has not been moved at this time.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Reamer to receive. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Your Worship, that's the last formal item on this agenda.
To adjourn, Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor Robinson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.